no longer serve me. I release all things that no longer work for me. I release all things that no longer serve me. I release all things that no longer work for me. I release all things that no longer serve me. I release all things that no longer work for me. I release all things that no longer serve me. I release all things that no longer work for me. I release all things that no longer serve me. I release all things that no longer work for me.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Wellness Embodiment workshop. I know it's a lunch, so feel free to snack away, eat your lunch while you participate in this workshop. We are inviting you to turn on your cameras if you'd like, but with the exercises that Kimberly will be leading us through, you are also welcome to turn off your camera if that makes you more comfortable to fully participate in the session. But I'm so grateful to see you all here. It's so amazing to have you here and also to have the expertise of Kimberly Hollins, who is a senior learning designer at the Continuum College and also an exceptional member and contributor on our DI committee with the PSO. She's been integral to the formation of the BIPOC staff mentorship program and is willing to share her knowledge pertaining to wellness practices in yoga. So I'm so excited to have her here. And Kimberly, feel free to introduce yourself and kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. So hi everyone. My name is Kimberly Hollins. My indigenous name is Kaya Ayoka. It's of the Cherokee lineage. My pronouns are she and her. And I just want to welcome you all here first and foremost. Today's mini workshop will really focus on some practical ways of learning how to identify elements of self-awareness, embodiment benefits in terms of the practices, and really a reflective inquiry in terms of how we feel in our own bodies and then how it shows up and projects to others. And so, although we won't do too much of a deep dive in today's workshop, we will get very hands-on. So feel free at any time to turn your cameras off as you practice some of these different movements and breath work, etc. Another thing to keep in mind is we'll also focus on some cultural philosophies around the Taoist tradition, the Buddhist tradition, as well as Kemetic yoga, and as well as in the Indian philosophy of yoga as well. So if there's questions during the first part of our presentation, feel free to shoot them our way, but afterwards we'll collect most of them for the end of the presentation, just as a heads up. So now I'm going to move into our community agreements. And after I read through those, we'll share a poll with you to kind of see who's in the audience and what your thoughts are. And then we'll progress further into the presentation. So I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this okay.
Looks great, Kimberly.
Okay, awesome. All right, so the community agreements for this workshop include don't force, but flow. So whether it's in conversation with others or in movement with ourselves, just something to consider. Another one is we begin with what we have and where we are. Open humility is not shamed. You don't know what you don't know. Another one is keep stories private, but share lessons learned. Another favorite of mine is counter culture of urgency. Another one is notice your edge, notice your comfort. Acknowledge possibilities and reciprocity, which is another goodie. And then the last one below is pause as often as needed. Are there any questions about these before we get started? Okay, we're going to bring up our community poll.
All right, so you all should see a poll that's titled self-care. So please feel free to fill out those 2 questions there. And then also in the chat, please feel free to put in the department that you're attending from and what has been the highlight of your day so far or your week.
Okay, awesome. So it looks like most of you answered for the first response, intentional care or intentional time caring for myself in different spaces. And then for the second question, embracing yourself in all ways. Love that. And you have a good percentage too, though, a form of self-acceptance regulated through expression movements. Lovely. Thank you all for sharing that. It helps me to kind of get a sense of who's in the room and how you're thinking about this topic already. Okay. So let's begin. Today's flow, as you could see, we started off with some grounding music, and then we moved through a community agreements listing, and then a community poll. And now we're working towards the workshop overview. So for this part, I really want to just walk you through some topics that ranges from different traditions of philosophies, about maybe 3 or 4. And then we're going to move into the worksheet activity that was emailed to you. And then we're going to do some hands-on practices with these applications, see how we feel in our bodies with these. And then we'll move to some Q&A and then do some wrap up. We'll also share some resources as well with you. Okay, so what is wellness embodiment? First of all, I'll say it's many things, and it's exactly what you guys had already responded to, right? And a big key word to take away from just embodiment in particular is knowing that any sensation, emotion, feeling, belief, or value that you encompass is not separate from your body. So in other words, what we feel because it's embedded, right? It's a way of being, right? And so you see people with different personalities that have been shaped through life experiences, right? All these have been accumulated into the body as well, right? And so it shapes how we see things, it shapes how we behave with others, it shapes what we choose to believe, and also how we perceive things. And so embodiment is really a process of self-acceptance, but also being able to be in our body in any way that we choose to, that is not only a sense of justice for who we are, but a testament to who we're becoming, right? Because it's always dynamic and it's always something moving and changing, right? It's a very, very cyclical process. So another definition that we can look at is wellness embodiment is a rooted practice. Now there's several different indigenous origins of it, and we'll just focus on a few in this presentation. But the ones I wanted to call out in particular, which I've studied closely with someone named Dr. Mwata Ashby, who's written several books on the Egyptian philosophy, is Egyptian yoga, also known as Smartawi, and also in the Chinese Taoist philosophy of Yin Yoga. Well, the reason why those ones are aligned in the way that they are is because they have very similar ways of thinking about embodiment. As you can see, I've listed some bullets here, intentional, right? And so in terms of how they sit, how they move, how they interact, right? It's all a very intentional process or practice rather. And it can be incredibly reflective, in particular, when we take the time to really notice ourselves and how we're showing up with others. And it takes a lot of practice, right? It's not something we learn overnight because there's so much sensory, things in our environment that really shape what we see and how we choose to see it. Another thing to think about is the emphasis on how it centers and aligns us, right? When we're in our bodies, right? But some people, we tend to be very open and just, relax. Other people are just kind of like reserved or closed in, right? How we are in our bodies with others really speaks to who we're becoming as we get older. And then the last two pieces in terms of meditative, if we tend to be inclined to certain repetitive movements when we're sitting at our desk working, right? It could be a form of a meditative movement, right? So if I always take the time to just maybe journal for like 2 to 5 minutes before I begin my next series of work tasks, right? That's a way to kind of be more intentional about what's happening in that moment, but also something for me to look back on and reflect and go, yeah, I remember I was having that particular emotion after that happened, right? Or maybe I had a spat with someone at home or a coworker, or maybe something rubbed me the wrong way when I was, in a group of people, right? It's taking the time to notice it, but then also to let it go, and then to go back later and kind of reflect on it to kind of see what sensations are coming up so they can fully process it out of the body. And last but not least is emotional regulation. How we choose to embrace or discharge rather feelings that come up with others is incredibly healthy. I know much of what we've learned either in our own parents' homes, regardless of our cultural backgrounds, right, is that we've been taught to be mindful of how we we express them, right? We don't want to be rude, we want to be respectful, right? But then you see other cultures who tend to be incredibly expressive with their emotions. Like if you are familiar with the Brazilian culture, for example, I have a really close girlfriend, and she is all about letting you know when she doesn't like something, when she's hurt or whatever, because that's just how it is, in Brazilian culture. They're very passionate people. And it just really shows in all different ways, and it's beautiful to witness, right? But for some people, that could be a lot, right? Because if you're very introverted, you're just like, whoa, right? you're getting all that energy towards me. And I'm just like, wait a minute, right? Like, where's my container? Like, where's my space? Because I don't know if I have enough space for you to hold that because we're not used to it, or because what we have on in our own inner world is maybe already a lot, right? And so to get that extra sensory experience from someone might be too much. But for others who have been able to kind of process and be around it more, have been able to build space and capacity for that, right? And it's part of what embodiment is as well. It's learning how to hold more internal space for yourself so you can hold it for others. Now, some benefit practices of embodiment. First and foremost, it helps to calm the nervous system. We have one of the most beautifully complex nervous systems in our body. And not only does it signal to us what tastes good, or if there's a particular smell happening or aroma happening, or helping us to hear something or see something. It's so interdisciplinary in terms of how we live, right? Without the nervous system, you know, a lot of what happens in the body would not be known to us, right? So it's very important that we nurture our nervous system and also remind ourselves that it does not work outside of the mind and body. It is interconnected. Another piece I want to say about the nervous system is that its friend, which is the vagus nerve, is integral in keeping you not only safe and engaged and also helping you to see when threats happening, but the whole system itself, which is aligned to something called the polyvagal theory. And we can save this term later if you want to look it up. But for the most part, what I'll share is that polyvagal theory goes into a three-tiered system of how your nervous system is regulated through your vagus nerve. And that's why having a certain amount of cholesterol is important to keep you balanced, because people that tend to have less tend to be more heightened awareness in terms of anxiety or depression, but also if you have low magnesium as well, that can also trigger you to be more susceptible to anxiety. And so a lot of what we've learned through different, I guess I'd say, social norms is that things are caused by other people. And it can be through trauma and so forth, but also nutrition is actually a very integral piece of helping us to stay regulated and grounded. The next piece I'll talk about is upregulates mood and calms anxiety, right? And so, like I mentioned, making sure your magnesium levels are where they should be. It's one of the highest known deficiencies across the US. And so one of the things that people do is they get something called a comprehensive metabolic panel, so they can see all their different vitamins and minerals and where they're at in their body, so they can at least maintain a balance that's right for their body. The other thing to touch on is expands conscious awareness. Now, for some of you that are probably already been practicing different embodiment practices, whether it's yoga, meditation, or mantras, what you'll also notice is that your level of awareness will begin to expand much further than you thought, right? So it's much like being able to sense energies and or certain types of sensations that arise in the body that you're not used to sensing, right? And it becomes more of an exploratory playground as you become more aware of how your body does what it does, right? Because your body is so powerful, right? It just knows how to do so many different things without you telling it to do so. And so because there's so much intelligence there, it's definitely worth, learning more about as we get older. And then last but not least, relieving tension in the body and enabling postural alignment to a memory. So what does that mean? So a lot of us maybe have been used to, sitting in chairs, right, and working. And so what this does is it creates a baseline of memory in the body, because it's always going to remember that you like to sit like this, for example, right? Shoulders may be up sometimes or maybe be down, right? But because you've done it so many times, your body has now been conditioned to move blood in that same exact pattern all the time, because that's how you've chosen to be, let's say, 8 hours a day or so forth. Or maybe you stand at your desk, or maybe you're on a yoga ball or something else, right? But remember, because our body keeps in contact with posterior memory, right? Remembering how you are most of the time, that's how the blood is learning to move most of the time, right? So when you think of it that way, it makes you more mindful in terms of what's going on in your body and why certain conditions occur. And while long standing movements, for example, or not long standing movements, but rather sitting for a long time, is linked to cardiovascular disease, right? So there's different reasonings behind why movement in particular and embodiment practices are very powerful in terms of helping you alleviate unneeded tensions within the body, but also improving your health. And so let's touch on self-awareness, which is integral to what we're going to be doing today. So for the most part, it's about being reflective with your internal and external environment, right? And as I touched on earlier, it's about postural memory and sensations and being able to pick up on what's going on in your body so that when you go to the doctor, for example, you have a pretty good read of what's happening, right? Because your doctor is only going to know what you tell them, right? And so it's very, very important to be memorable in terms of how you are with yourself, right? And what you do, because we are our first doctor, first and foremost. Next on the list is tonality and weight. One of the things you'll notice when we do an activity is the power of sound and weight. We all have a unique quality that we bring to the world, and in how we do it, we have a particular tone, right? And maybe it's heavy, maybe it's light, maybe it's scratchy, maybe it's peppery, whatever you want to describe it as. We'll get into with the worksheet. But for the most part, it's noticing how we are with ourselves first, because that's what we're projecting out to the world, right? And being able to be mindful of that is helpful, because some folks forget that how we see is also how we perceive. And when there's a lack of discernment, which is the next point in the slide, our perception of what we see can fool us. And that's the last thing we want to happen as we get older, right? Because we want to be able to be very mindful in terms of where we're at and who we're with, more importantly, right? Because the power of discernment is essentially speaking to being able to perceive more than what we particularly perceive in a given site. So for example, if we're in a space in a museum, right, and there's only blue paintings on the wall, right, and there's maybe one red one, but it's above you, right? The point is to be very mindful in how you take in information and what you perceive in terms of spatial distance, in terms of color, and so forth. Why? Because it's very empowering to be able to know and sense things that either have the potential to brighten how you see the world and or to protect you from certain things that happen in the world, so vice versa. So there's a lot of benefits to just being self-aware in particular, but also being very familiar with what your body does and why it does what it does. Okay, so the first thing we're going to get into in terms of learning more about the background and embodiment practice is learning about the journey of Ra and Surya Namaskara. So the journey of Ra is basically the same thing as Surya Namaskar. It's that reoccurring yoga pose of salutations that they do generally in the morning, but it can be done also in the evening or any time really. But the reason why I pulled these two on specifically is because in Kemetic yoga, the name is different than it is in the Indian philosophy of Surya Namaskara, but they have the same key point. It's to move the body in a very repetitious cycle of movements to detox it. So I'm basically just showing you the connections between Kemetic yoga and also Indian yoga in terms of the movements, because they both grew alongside each other as it developed. People often attribute yoga to Western yoga that's done in the US today, which is very, very distant from its origins in terms of the purpose of it. And so, although we won't go into those details today, what's important to know is that the meaning behind these movements actually align to cosmic principles that the ancient sages back in the day utilized to better themselves in terms of discipline and mindfulness. Other thing to notice on the slide is the second one that says symbolizes the cycle of reincarnation and the process of transmigration of the soul. Now, this one is very specific to a particular belief system that may be aligned to either Indian philosophy or Kemetic yoga. But again, that's one of interpretation based on those that practice it. But again, just showing you the extent of what's connected and how they kind of think about the moves that they do when they're involved in these in different spaces. And then last but not least is psychosocial development. This is really key when one is learning how to either improve self-love or improve their involvement in being in spaces with others. It gives you more of a heightened sense of grounding, because once you're able to build a greater self-awareness in terms of how you move and interact with yourself, the greater you'll be able to see who you should be around, and also where you should be. It's almost like developing extrasensory abilities within yourself. But because these sages have done this for so long, they've kind of mastered these abilities, right? That others still strive to get to. But again, it's not about mastery per se, unless that's your goal. But what is important is to begin to practice something that's going to empower you to be your best self. And this is just one of the many paths you can choose to do. Okay, and these are just some examples I wanted to show of Egyptian yoga postures. The first being nut. You'll notice that that first photo is actually what's called downward dog in Western yoga, but in Egyptian yoga, it's called nut because it represents expansion in the sky. Similar to the cobra pose in the middle, which is also known as upward dog, but it's known as cobra, because again, it's just symbolizing a particular quality of being in the Kemetic yoga. And last but not least, asar, which is a laying down pose. And in Indian philosophy, that is known as Shavasana. So it's literally like the last pose in yoga where they have you just lay down and relax and take everything in. This pose is also called the mummy pose, which is again kind of like a beginning of a cycle of reincarnation known in Kemetic yoga before they begin yoga. So a lot of connections being made to Western yoga and Egyptian yoga, because I wanted to show you the decolonization that's taking place when you remember the origins of what you practice, instead of just practicing what's given to you when you go into a yoga studio. Okay, and then I'll quickly go into yin yoga. What's very interesting about yin yoga is that it's rooted in Taoist concepts of yin and yang, which is about balance essentially, but also yin representing a passive quality, and then yang representing more of an active quality. So here's a more direct example of this. So if you practice like gentle yoga or yin yoga, it's a very slow paced yoga versus an active form of like capoeira or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right, where you're moving your legs a lot around, right? And the beauty of both, though, is that you're allowing your body to be integrated in very complementary movements to enhance your body's health, right? You have your slow and you have your fast, right? And you're allowing your body to kind of make amends with both worlds, because we are beings that tend to learn how to adapt to our needs based on what we experience. And for me, I realized I need a little bit of both to become more in depth in my health, right? Because I was doing so much slow yoga that I realized I needed to kick, right? Because for me, that was very expressive and it was very empowering to kick and learn different martial arts as a form of balance. And another beautiful thing about yin yoga, if you think about a rope, right, with different knots tied alongside of it, right, maybe spaced apart evenly, it represents like a meridian system in the body. So, for example, if I have that same rope with those knots across it, and let's say it's across my arm, when you're actually in different yin yoga poses, those movements are helping to detox certain meridian systems that actually align to your organ systems, which is very important because certain movements either help to expand or unblock things that are going on in your body. And that's why yin yoga is sometimes preferred by certain people because they want those benefits of affecting the fascia in the body, which is basically the connective tissue, allowing to be cleansed and detox, as opposed to more fast-paced yoga like vinyasa or Bikram and so forth. One thing to point out too about yin yoga is the values of compassion, frugality, and humility are rooted in its upbringing. And last but not least, the belief of living in harmony with nature is really a key takeaway with yin yoga, mostly because it's about going to bed at a certain time every night, in order to honor the sun setting and the sun rising, and also eating foods that are in season, right? And so folks that follow this tradition tend to be very traditional with this philosophy. And again, these are just different ways of being that people prescribe to because they want to figure out a different way to live outside of what they're used to in order to kind of gain a newer insight in terms of what makes the most sense for my life and how do I want to show up in my life that brings me more joy. Okay. So now we're going to go into our first practice. If you're sitting in your chair and if your camera's off, that's totally fine. But what I'd like you to do is to gently close your eyes. Now, in Buddhist meditations, they have a variety of mantras. And for those that are not familiar with the mantra, it's basically just a repeated word that can have a sense of empowerment and a sense of affirmation to the person chanting it. It's not necessarily associated with the religion unless you choose to have that affiliation. But different mantras attribute different things depending on what you repeat. Now, this one in particular, I chose because I discovered through one of my friends who practices Buddhist Nichiren path that it aligns towards your chakras. So when I was chanting this, I was just like, oh, this is interesting, right? So I'll say it first and I'll have you say it as well. So you can kind of sense what I'm saying. But first, I want you to place your hand over your throat gently for those that are participating. And just gently say the word Nam. And feel free to mute your microphones as well if they're not already muted. But say Nam again. And you'll notice that that sound tends to reverberate right on your throat, right? Now, I want you to place your left hand on your stomach and also on your throat and say Nyoho, 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 Nyoho. Now, if you say it close enough, you'll feel it in your throat, but you'll also feel it in your belly, right? And your belly is associated with that orange chakra, which is on the screen to your left. And I don't think I gave a brief intro of what chakras are, but just to be concise, chakras are basically like energy centers in the body that align along the cross of your body in the form of colors. in certain spiritual traditions, and they also align with different organ systems. And so the concept behind the chakras is that if it's closed, that basically means there's something going on with one of your organs. And if it's open, that tends to mean there's something expansive happening within your body that's being enhanced for your organs. Now, let's go to the next word, which is renge. Renge. Now, this one, I want you to place your hand in the center of your sternum, which is right below your breastbone. And just say renge, 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 renge. And you should feel that sound right there. And then last but not least, kiho, 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 kiho. Place your left hand again on your stomach and your right hand right on your throat and say kiho, 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 kiho. Now take just about maybe 2 inches up from your belly button and say kiho again. Kiho, kiho, kiho. You'll notice that the sound reverberates right above your belly button. And when you say that full mantra all together, it has a nice little rhythm all across from the throat all the way down to your stomach. And so whoever created this mantra was actually being very intentional because of how the sounds reverberate across that area of the body. Okay, we're going to move on to the next one. So if you mind, go ahead and grab your worksheets out. I need to get more hands-on with this activity. And if you're not ready, just let me know. Okay, so on your worksheet, you have 3 different columns. One says breath, voice, and body. And then beneath them are 3 columns. And the first column has the word describe. And then beneath it, it says, what does the breath sound like? Now, we just went through one activity where we were able to kind of listen in terms of that mantra and how it aligned across the center of the chakra systems. Now for this one, I just want you to take a deep breath, but in how you do it, I want you to breathe in through your nose, hold it for 4 seconds, and then gently release it. I want you to do that at least 2 to 3 times. And then using that question on your worksheet, feel free to jot it down on an open Word doc of your choice, whatever you have in front of you. And the idea is to kind of get a sense of what your breath sounds like. And it sounds like an interesting, kind of concept at first when you think about what does your breath sound like? Right? Because you don't really think about that, right? However, what I've learned, like when I was younger, maybe about 10 or 12, is that my breath was super heavy when I was a kid. And I didn't know why I was breathing that way. Because my mom or dad didn't have asthma, but there was something going on with me where it was just super heavy. And as I've gotten older, I've learned to regulate it through different breathwork activities. But breath has its own sound. And what's powerful about sound in terms of breath, and it lets you know, hey, right now I'm feeling a lot of excitement, or I'm having a lot of tension right now, or ooh, I don't feel safe, right? But just go ahead and just take that time to kind of feel through that. Does it feel heavy? Does it feel light? Does it feel raspy? In the next minute or so, we're going to move on to the second question in the column. Okay. If you're still exploring the first question, just feel free to continue at your own pace. So for this one, the question reads, if your voice had a color or colors, what is it? And what does it feel like when using those words? So I want you to think to yourself of some words that are very empowering, and then also a set of words that make you feel like you're just nothing at all. And I want you to contrast between those different words. And if you had to label the empowering words versus the least empowering words, a color, what would it be? And then also labeling what it feels like to use those different words that contrast each other. The point is to notice the difference between how you say those different things to yourself and to give it a language that you recognize. Because oftentimes when we do those things, it's just kind of like a one-off, right? But in this activity, we're actually paying attention to it, and we want to give it some weight in terms of how it makes us feel, so we can explore a little bit further. It'll take about 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next column. Okay, and for those of you that are still working through the second column, feel free to do so. I'm going to go ahead and move to the last question. What does the body feel like in these movements versus contractive movements? So the first movement I'm going to show you will be more of a expansive movement, and then I'm going to do a contractive movement. And I just want you to record what it feels like in your body to experience those movements. And then I want you just to explore on your own other movements and how you feel in those. So the first one, I'm sitting upright in my chair. I'm just going to expand my arms all the way out. My hands are extended. My fingers are spaced apart. And they're just reaching up into the sky. And I'm going to gently rock my head back. And I'm going to allow myself to smile. And I'm going to release. And then for the contraction, I'm going to slump my body over towards my knees, allow my head to hang. I'm going to allow my hands just to hang over my thighs with no particular direction, allowing the weight of my hands to hang as well with no particular angle or tension being held there. My head is extended. My chin is towards my chest. My eyes are just looking down. Now, because both of those movements offer something different depending on how we feel in our body, one thing was very clear for me is that when I was in the extended pose of just being up, of my head up, there is a certain lightness that I was able to project through versus when I was hunched over, it was almost as if I was not feeling as creative or inviting with myself as I'd like to be. And this goes back to our initial conversation when we discussed postural memory and how your body continues to shape more of who you are based on that postural memory, and how your blood begins to flow differently depending on how you are every day with yourself and different movements and different patterns and so forth. Okay, now before we move to Q&A, feel free to continue any notes you have that you can wrap up and share with yourself or others later. We're going to do one more brief activity, and then we can move into any questions if you have them. Tiana will also share a really great resource from the Embodiment Institute in the chat with you all. So this is called the bottom-up heart breath awareness activity. And I have the full instructions also on the slide. So if you miss anything, feel free to glance at the slide. So I'll invite you to sit with your eyes closed or softly gazed. Place your right or left hand across your heart. Gently inhale through your nose for about 4 seconds, and then pause. Now gently and very slowly through your mouth or nose, release it for about 5 seconds or more. And go ahead and repeat through it again. At your own pace, gently inhale through your nose for about 4 seconds. Gently pause. And on your exhale, you want to release through your nose or your mouth for 5 seconds or longer. Go ahead and go once or twice more on your own. The purpose of a lot of breathwork practices This one in particular, it not only lowers your blood pressure, but it also calms your nervous system. These are some easy mini practices that we can do either during our breaks at work or at home. All right. For those of you that are continuing, feel free to do so. Their cameras on or off. Wanted to reserve these last few minutes for any questions that you may have about either the practices that we shared or any questions about the philosophies that were mentioned, or just your own experience, either teaching or practicing these things in your own time. And thank you, Tiana, for hosting us today.
Absolutely. This was fantastic, Kimberly. You were excellent. I feel like you just gave such a comprehensive overview of so many different, just parts of yoga and then also the cultural knowledge as well. So I learned a lot about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love the topic of any form of embodiment work, decolonization work. It's fascinating. It's always something to learn.
I did have
Yes.
one question for you, actually. Oh, sorry. Lisa, did you want to go ahead?
No, I just want to say thank you, Kimberly. It's always it also felt really good to move in that way.
Oh, awesome.
Like that.
Lisa from LD. Okay.
Yeah, it's me.
Yeah.
Hey.
Nice to see you. Good, good.
Yeah, I agree with that, Lisa. It was so soothing, and I feel like rejuvenated just with going through those breathing exercises. But Kimberly, my question for you was, what has practicing yoga revealed to you, and just like some of the main benefits that you've seen throughout your time teaching, and also just like your journey with mindfulness?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I've been teaching yoga for quite a few years. Um, I think probably the scariest thing that's I've experienced, but also the most beneficial thing I've experienced is just a heightened sense of awareness. There was moments to where I could like feel the blood under my skin move. And I went to the doctor about that. And he's actually a naturopathic doctor. And so he's able to relate because he has a similar lineage that he practices in Ayurveda. And so over time it went away, but it was incredibly terrifying to feel that because it's like being more alive than you ever anticipated. And just like, okay, I wanted to be aware, but that's a lot, you know. And so it gradually went away once I wasn't focusing on it as much. But nonetheless, it was also very powerful to experience, because then I realized that these practices that I was doing in terms of just breath work were beyond my comprehension in terms of just what was possible, but also to be more humble in terms of how I was feeling, and to not let that, scare me away from the practice itself. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, thank you. That is very interesting. And that's, great that you were able to be so in touch with your body, because I feel like when we're in a society that's so fast paced, we often kind of dismiss what our bodies are telling us, and we just continue to persist and, don't take the time to pause. So even just, like sitting here and discussing that, I think is helpful for many people that maybe haven't realized they need to slow down, but that their bodies are telling them something.
Exactly. Exactly. Is there any other questions?
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I just again wanted to thank everyone for being in community today. I really appreciate you all taking a little bit of your time to engage with this workshop, and also your support of the BIPOC Staff Mentorship Program. Please feel free to send any questions that you have to Kimberly. I'll share out her information following this. And the session was also recorded, so you'll receive a recording of that as well, and resources to be able to implement some of these mindfulness practices in your daily life. So, hope you all have a great rest of your day and a long weekend ahead.
Awesome. Bye, guys.
Bye.
And Tiana, if you can stay on for a moment.